You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Breanna Cee Martins paints the mirage of an America that never existed for people like her and entire swaths of the population of this country. The artist's watercolor paintings fall away from the viewer like a half-remembered dream, images of ghostly and phantom children coming together to explode in kaleidoscopic colors. Working from found black and white photos, the images metamorphose into Technicolor nightmares, the old made new, children dressed up as monsters and monsters dressed up as children. These monochromatic visions glow with infernal light, watching the viewer. Watch them. Posed family photos captured the conflicts raging beneath the surface, the pause or unease, creating narrative tension, a rift between what is expected and what's seen and better left unsaid. There are images captured from the afterglow of a fading star, an apparition of our world growing dimmer amidst the passage of time. These paintings confront you with pleading eyes, asking the viewer to delve deeper into the question, does this familial imagery have personal meaning to you? Or is it evocative of an emotional scene you might have remembered, yet never experienced? Breanna Cee Martins, so excited to have you on the show.
Hi.
I saw your images on Instagram and was immediately enthralled by them. The beautiful color and the what's underneath too, and reading about your process, with the photos. Before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about you as an artist. Have you always been an artist? I mean, were you a little kid running around being an artist, or did you have a moment where in your development you're like, yeah, I'm an artist. I'm that person.
I'm actually a third generation artist. So going back to my grandma, through my father and through to me. So it was a little bit expected in a way, but I knew that being an artist was more than a family business. When it became clear that I can't help but to make art, I don't know what to do besides make art. I don't know how to live without it or without creating it. So it's become it's my, my soul.
Yeah, your way of expression. In talking about and thank you for that. And talking about the images, there's a delicacy there. You can assume or start to feel the people that come through in how you present them with the watercolor. Tell us about, you just told me that you find some of these photos in the city I was born, in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Before we got on here, you're mentioning that you find photos. So tell us about that. Like, tell us about finding the photos and how you make these beautiful art pieces.
Oh yeah. A lot of them come from found photos, either bought or traded. Sometimes I get submissions from people who like my art, who will send me photos that they think appeal to me. Really, it's a lot of going through boxes and boxes of old photos of people, strangers, and looking for ones that like come out to me. They always kind of like jump. And usually while I'm like sort of sifting through, so you can just kind of picture me in a thrift shop going through a big box of photos, and I'll go through and I'll make a pile of like definitelys and possiblies. And really it's about finding this sort of inferred narrative that I go for. A certain amount of context in the photo that can create a storyline in the viewer's head, or even just in my head for myself. And those are the ones that I really kind of like glom onto the. Sometimes I think of them as almost, if not iconic, if like a template of Americana. I'm working on a large one right now that has a girl showing off her like brand new bike, and her like little sister is sitting on the steps and just looks so miserable and jealous with like her hand on her chin.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of gives me this story that popped from the image that I try to like really make present in the finished product. So each of them are kind of their own little story.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the emotion and the so when I look at those images, there's a magic in the art. There's a magic where their stories or faces or something comes through. Is it an emotional connection that you make to wondering what's going on beyond, like the images that you see? Or are you looking for that type of thing, or does the mystery come to you? You're like, what is going on behind this? What do you think attracts you, or do you look for something in particular?
It's really kind of, it comes together in two waves, like there'll be my intention behind the piece, and that's always inherently attached to the photo and what's contained in the image. But they kind of like dovetail and sort of move together. A piece I recently, like put online was kind of pulled from this idea of like a green inferno, sort of these bubbling green flames. And I wanted it to be that the inferno was of like the plant based, like a cold fire,
Yeah.
The colors, I started thinking a lot about the Disney like cartoon associations with like purple and green, Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty, and how she appears in this kind of cloud of like green flame. And then also there's a horror movie called Green Inferno that is a like ecological cannibal movie. Which I really I wouldn't say I enjoyed the movie, but I did kind of I liked that sort of description of a jungle or like overwhelming wildness as a green inferno. And so all those things and those ideas kind of dovetailed and started to move through the piece as I worked on it, and as I kind of played with the perspective and figuring out really what was like important to me. I have some strange arbitrary rules in painting that I like go by, like for myself, as a way of working, where I don't change anything about the photo. I had like a period when I was first starting out where I did some portraits and then I would put like a monster behind them or something. And it was just a little bit too contrived for me and like what I was going for, because I would like these to be kind of a subtle horror, like a subtle spookiness to them, where you see them and they look and you're like, oh, it's a bright colored picture of kids, but then it's sort of that like sort of slow dread. And because of the nature of the found photos, a lot of them are staring at you. And so I've done paintings where sometimes the people in the painting are staring almost over your shoulder. And I'm currently working on a painting right now of a baby lying in grass, and there's a shadow falling over the baby. And the painting is called Under a Shadow of Death. And the shadow is theoretically the viewers, the photographers, the observers.
Yeah.
So it's kind of putting you into it. So that's what I go for.
And thanks on that. I saw that the painting you referred to in the green. I just in my head, when I painted just once or twice, you're helping me articulate it, but there's some sort of green churn or green energy or something that I've
Mm.
dabble with, and I love that. I love that so much. Of course, your Instagram's called Pretty Spooky Girls, and there's a ghostly aspect to all you do, probably by the very nature of it. I mean, what comes through is, while it's bright and colorful, our mind quickly gleans that it's from somewhere else, or maybe another universe. It's familiar, it's not familiar, and that's the ghostly piece to it. So it's very powerful in that to draw the viewer in. I say it's fascinating and beautiful art, and that leads to the question I have for you, and the show gets into a third generation artist. You talk about how important art in creating is for your mind and navigating the world. But what is art for you? Like, you this is what you do, but what is it?
Art for me is not even just a like self expression. I mean, it comes from that, but it's really about expressing an idea or sharing a story. I create these pieces, and the current series I'm working on is called American Carnage, um, which is sort of born of the idea that America, we live in this historical chain of violence from the very early days of this country. It's been a very like violent and sort of hunted past.
Yeah.
And so through these paintings, I'm trying to express that idea that the sort of glorified 40s, 50s, 60s, the idea of like this America as this sort of shiny veneer, really, we're looking at it through rosy colored glasses. And once you get past like these white picket fences and underneath the green grass, there's a rot and malaise to it. And
Yeah.
it's a mirage. And so by painting these ghosts of America, essentially, I'm trying to give voice to the idea that only by re-examining our history and like recontextualizing what we sort of like thought of as normal or has always been this idea, that we can like start to understand our present and then finally be able to move forwards. And so for me, art is a way of sharing that idea, and it's something I think is important. And so that's why I paint, and that's why I share them, is to try to get that idea out in my own way. And that's why art is essential to me, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why I'm making it and why I can't help but make it.
Well, thank you for the idea and thinking about what's behind it. And I think I completely agree with you. And I do think it's a glossed over part of the U.S. of A. The blood, the dislocation, historically. It's uncomfortable, right? And I think what the ghosts or the images or the faces that were there start to tell a different story, and I believe that's I for me, that type of art and the radical inflection that you do, really, like, that's there's some great power in there. I wanted to ask you, in relation to that, that puts the importance of the art that you do and how you think about it historically. But what do you think the role of art is now? Has the role of art changed, or as long as humans been doing art, the role of art is this? So the question is, what is the role of art?
I think the role of art is anything that they'll let us have, you know? Um, I don't think that art can be anything more than like the footprint that it's allowed to have culturally. But I think that that footprint can encompass everything, and it can be nothing to someone else. It's probably the most subjective possible thing, and so I try to use my art in a way to express these ideas, while someone else's art's role might be for a more like commercial purpose, or someone else's might be just for themselves, just painting at home. And so I think art's role is everything and nothing all at once, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, I dig that. I dig that. All right, so tell us. Tell us a little bit about this. Right, so you got your paintings up, and people, have seen them, or they give you a reaction. What's going on with your person moseying on in and taking a look at your paintings? And when it's new, I mean, I saw your stuff. I'm like, I'm down, love this stuff, consume every image. But what about other folks? What do you think they're thinking when they count these spooky images?
Well, it's been very interesting as far as getting to at an art opening as the artist. You're kind of a little bit anonymous, especially if it's like a bigger show where like no one actually knows what you look like. I've joked that one of these days I'll just wear a shirt with my paintings on it so people know that I'm the one who painted one of them. But just getting to overhear people's reactions and their encounters with the art has been really rewarding in terms of sometimes people, it reminds them of themselves at a younger age. I've heard so many people say, "Oh, this reminds me of
Yeah.
my sister at that age." Sort of what I go for is the long read and the short read, where you walk in and you see this brightly colored image of kids who are a little bit anachronistic, like you mentioned, from another world almost. And then you start to find personal like ways into it, like relating to it through the fact that we're all children at some point. We all have these memories, and as this like unique product of like a very American childhood, that's what can kind of draw in a viewer, and then sort of having that creeping dread that comes from when you're really examining the paintings, because the children I'm painting are in danger. I grew up with missing posters on milk cartons, and the idea that I could just be gone any moment, and also exploring this tradition of like the American short horror story from like Hawthorne through Poe through Lovecraft through King, and the idea of this very American sort of creeping backyard suburban horror, like a town that gets converted to vampires but no one notices, or like just sort of these ideas of a very like American hunting is kind of what like I try to have be the spirit of the painting, literally. Sometimes they're a little bit of conjuring from, like it feels a little bit like you're bringing the spirit back of the person. Sometimes a little bit because of the nature of the watercolor, they kind of seem to paint themselves. So that's
Yeah.
I wanted
to jump in on that. I wanted to ask about that. So, and it might be a strange question, but moving towards it with you got your black and white photograph, and I would look at that and I'd be like, as far as creating something from that, I'd be like, well, what was there? What's the color? Like, like how does it come out? And like, and then the colors to come out from there. What do you intimate or see within that photograph, and how does it connect to the color that comes out?
That's a really good question. The color really kind of comes from, I always sketch the images. And even when I first see the photo, I'm kind of starting to pick up on what I think the color could be. Sometimes it's a little bit more analytical in terms of right now, or I've done a series before that was like the sort of 60s Crayola color box colors. So there I was kind of just fitting to a color to the piece, and I had like the range. But a lot of times this really is kind of about like the swirl of a color and like what will put the color together with the image. Sometimes it'll be me trying not to be so literal in terms of if it's a beach scene, doing it blue, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to try to stop myself. I definitely have colors I very much love and use too much, especially like turquoise. I think I use too much. So
that's totally fine. That's totally fine to use too much turquoise. Don't no stops from here.
Yeah, and sometimes yeah, it kind of becomes a little bit of trying for me to do something unexpected. I've noticed I do the least amount of yellow paintings. I think yellow is really hard for me to get like depth and shadows in. So if you go through my paintings, you'll notice that a lot of the times the yellows I use are really kind of like, I don't know, just right up there against a shade of orange.
Gotcha.
I tried doing a lemon yellow painting before, and then you couldn't really see anything in it. So
yeah, I love hearing about the, you know, with the color too. I've I started painting by myself, you know, like learning to paint, and I've done some things that I really enjoy and others have enjoyed. But one of the things I found fascinating was I had never painted, right? And so when you start painting, a lot of different things happen that wouldn't have happened before. And one of the big things was color and my relationship with color. Like the colors I enjoy seeing in the world weren't, they just didn't correspond to the colors that I wanted to use. And that was just so earth shattering once I started. And it's interesting you mentioned yellow, because I started to use a lot of yellow, but it's not a color I ever like in like seeing, or I like yellow, but it was nothing that really jazzed me or excited me or moved me. But when I started painting and creating myself, I'm like, God, I adore this, like this yellow. So I had this completely different relationship to it in creating. So it created a completely different dynamic in my experience of like the world or how I understood, because I'm like, the things that I like or don't like might be inflected. And so I have one other confession. I can't deal with glitter. Glitter is my kryptonite. Because I can't put it all back. It's permanent. You can't find it. It's on all these spaces. It drives me nuts. But when a couple times I tried to use glitter in painting, and I loved it. Just to kind of accentuate. And I'm like, I have control of the glitter. My kryptonite is in my painting. So colors and materials in painting for me really just kind of switched my head around.
And something I find interesting is that, you know, my paintings are monochromatic, but they aren't just one color. Most of them include 5 or 6 different shades of a certain color or different kinds. And for me, it's really interesting trying to, it feels a little bit like pulling wool over the eye of the viewer in like kind of a pleasant way, like a magic trick, where I'm trying to get sort of these elements of like traditional academic painting, like a cast shadow or a turning or to create form, but I'm using only one color. And so it's really about kind of like figuring out what I can twist and how I can contort it and make it look like the whole painting is out of one color, but really it's out of these multiple different shades of a whole sort of range of the color, you know? And then that's what creates the paintings. Because if they were all just like the same single tube of pink, I wouldn't be able to get shadows. I wouldn't be able to get like these sort of
the inflection of the eye or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really about kind of like twisting all those to become this new thing for the eye.
Well, thanks for talking about the color there too, and that I've seen that in there, but I've become fascinated with those type of inflection. I guess, Breanna, the main thing is I got to get I'll talk to you later. I got to get an original so I can stare at the thing right in itself and not a photo. Not a photo. I got to go right in. So I know I'm
Yeah,
gonna. I know I'm gonna.
some of them are very fun,
Yeah.
especially these larger ones I'm working on. There's definitely an element where they kind of like swim. You sort of like get like absorbed into the larger ones. And I'm working on one that's 11 feet tall right now, and I can't wait to see it up on
Oh my gosh! Really?
gallery wall, like as itself, because I think it will really be kind of a portal into this world. So I'm really excited about that.
Wow.
The girl, it's this one. I don't know. I'm not sure if you've seen. I posted it a little bit. Like previews. It's the girl on the bicycle,
Yeah.
and she's actually taller than me, and I'm tall. I'm like 5'9". But yeah, it's like bigger than
Yeah.
me, and I think in person, it's really gonna like be sort of monumental, like monument sized, a little bit like encountering a large like bas relief or like a statue in a town square or something where just kind of like looking down at you.
I'm excited. I'm excited. I gotta. I think about too. And on the just for me and thinking about I don't know, maybe the people and the history and the ghosts. I'm out on the West Coast. I'm out in Oregon now, but I was steeped there in New England, and you and I know that that's a different beast. Some more time, different geography. I would say older ghosts.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that to that in the region, and I know thinking about you searching for photos and stuff, I can just really picture it, like out there and how it feels a bit different. I love that with the New England. You mentioned one of the pieces I just didn't want to forget because you dropped in there Hawthorne, and I was thinking about the theme that you were talking about where it's the veneer, and I'm right with you. I'll travel any journey like getting beyond the veneer or going to the board, finding out which is now like ambiguity. I really enjoy you know I really enjoy that journey. One of the things I was wondering, um is there something within, and talking about Hawthorne, he had like I think the same type of thing, or some of those classical New England writers. It wasn't the surface was there, and the roles were there, and the societal roles was there, and the priest was there, and the religious leader was there,
Mhm.
and then you went into the forest, or then you went back behind things, and that's where everything else was. And that's like in that tradition. I think of some of the authors that you had mentioned, was that the ghosts and the horror or the strange stories were over and somewhere back behind. We might
Yep.
say, well, maybe back behind the picket fence in the house, that's the horror, or the mystery of the woods and the untamed aspect of that. And do you find in exploring that, those other things, that which is behind, what do you find it says about the veneer? I mean, you get back behind the veneer, but what do you think it says about the facade of society?
Yeah, I think the veneer is the protection, I think a lot about like early settlers, pilgrims, and how terrifying it must have been. Just even just growing up like in New England and going to the edge of the forest and standing at it. The sounds and the shadows and the way it stretches back and back and back. And in Maine, there's parts of the woods where you can go to, and if you just start walking, you won't know when you're in Canada. You won't know how far away you are from home.
Yeah.
And it swallows you. And so I just think about sort of that veneer as the protection, those those wooden palisades, the sharpened trunks of trees with like the spikes and stuck into the ground to protect a village. But if as a person in that time, if you're believing in witchcraft and you believe that these creatures can slip their skins and, you know, steal a baby for their poultice, what's a log wall gonna do to protect you? You know? So I think of that veneer of religion, society, civilization is sort of, it's all about the stories we tell ourselves, you know, and that goes back to the whole like American carnage idea. Especially something I talk about a lot is there's a trope in horror of like the Indian burial ground, you know, like the Amityville horror house was haunted because it was built allegedly, not actually
native burial grounds.
Yeah. But if you think about the nature and the history of this country, the whole country is an Indian burial ground. And we are all living in a haunted house, you know, and we're all being haunted by it. And it's a very unique American veneer of the sort of course of our history, which is a very short history. But the fact that in America, like we're all haunted, I feel. Every small town has its house that you're not supposed to go by at night because something like bad happened there. And every town has its own like unique ghost story. Or if you park your car in the cemetery at night with a girl, then you can see a ghost behind you in the rearview mirror or something. And then every region has its own cryptid, its own creature, its own Mothman, its Jersey Devil, its own obscure creature that haunts the woods just out of like the sight of headlights. And it's a very unique experience as an American. Now we're surrounded by these stories, and that's what I try to really share through like the writing I do on my page. Just in terms of, for instance, I got a tip one time about a like ghost bus from a school bus of children that had gotten hit by a train, and that allegedly appears at this intersection.
Oh,
and
wow.
So while researching that, I found 3 or 4 other instances of buses full of kids that got hit by trains. And then that brought me to a bus in Texas that crashed into a quarry and half the children drowned. And then that's another ghost story. And so it's sort of, these stories are all around us. And I don't know if we tell them to ourselves to reconcile ourselves with grief and loss and horror and the little cuts through the veneer of our lives. But so much of it, from mass shootings to serial killers, is a very unique proposition. And so for me, it's a little bit like ghosts are just around us all the time. Whether or not it is a literal manifestation of something paranormal, for me, it's more like all these ghosts are stories, and they're all just hanging in the air all the time. And if you like pull the thread of one, you start to find others. And so I think maybe the veneer of like a Hawthorne story, you know, of like a priest with a secret, is us trying to tell ourselves that like everything's all right and that we can sleep at night.
Yeah. There's something I thought about with the, you know, the black and white and brought the color, and I was thinking about it in terms of indigenous and native folks, and it has to do about depiction and moving towards color, because, you know, I've interviewed many indigenous artists on the show. I've had 16 from over 20 different tribes, and you know, there's this horrific history that there's a frustration on it not being reconciled or dealt with, right? But there's also the fact that peoples have persevered, that peoples have vibrant cultures, vibrant music, vibrant language, vibrant active, and so the color and the presentation of that becomes very important. We're not talking about, yes, the ghost story is there, but with the color and the culture and the now for indigenous people, that's also really there as well too. There's something that seems to me about moving from the black and white to the color that, like, I think you're giving the story life again, or making a proposition about what's going on there to evoke folks. So it's an exciting part of creation, and seeing how you talk about it and think about it, because it's like revivifying something for presentation. Like, I'm back.
Yeah, a little bit of conjuring, a little bit of...
That's a better word.
The kaleidoscopic, like, view of things, and just kind of recontextualizing them. Because it would be very easy for me to do these in black and white, or sort of like muted tones. And I definitely played around with that a little bit, like when I was starting out. But for me, really, it is about trying to breathe some life back into these, like, old ghosts, and make them new again.
Yeah, I got the big question for you, and I think you dipped into it already. I'm going to ask it again because I don't want to tell you that your answer was your answer. But why? The big question is, why is there something rather than nothing?
Because nothing is an absence. And I can't imagine not being full, just being filled with life. And so to resist the absence, to resist the nothing, to resist the void, I create. And I create things, and I throw them into a void to see if I can fill it up.
Yeah. I'm on the, me and many others on the other side of the void trying to grab what you're throwing. So, Breanna Cee Martins, tell us where to find your art, how to encounter your art, what you create, where do folks go? Because it's going to be really important for listeners here to take a look, to take a close look at something that I'm fascinated with. But what do people do to get to you?
They can go to my website. It is breannamartins.com. I have my Instagram, which is kind of my main way of sharing stuff from the studio, which is funny because I've amassed a lot of people who are very, like, interested in it, but it really just kind of started as a casual thing of me feeling, well, I take a lot of pictures of my work as I work, so I might as well share them somewhere. My Instagram is Pretty Spooky Girls. I'll be having some show announcements coming up soon so that people can see my work in person. And I also have a shop that is on the way, so that will be online soon as well.
Ooh, okay. These are all the things we wanted to hear. Yeah, that's great. And I think, like, finding you on Instagram, I mean, I again, when I look at things, I think a lot, and I drop back into the story that's behind. So what you do just pulls me right in to think about those type of things. And, talking about art can be an odd thing for some, right? They'd be like, I just got to do the shit. Like, I just got to, create. I don't want to talk about somethings and nothings and why the hell the universe is and that stuff. But I think that it engages things like we chat about history, color, ghosts, living, non-living, ambiguity. And I learned early on, and what I was fascinated with, it wasn't, like, as an example, it wasn't what Texas or Mexico was. It was like, what's going on at the border? What cultures? And I'm not talking about immigration. I'm talking about at borders when things become one thing and they're not another. What is that going on? And that's where you live in your art. So I'm going to hang around there. So
yeah, the border between living and memory, I think is
Absolutely.
right around where I try to hang out.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I recommend that you hanging out with us on the podcast here, but definitely check out Breanna's paintings and places that she mentioned. And I wanted to thank you so much. For me, I got to tell you, it's always a personal kick for me to talk to folks on the East Coast, because West Coast is like a completely different universe, and I'll talk to anybody about that anytime. It's like it's beautiful, wonderful, and strange, but it ain't like the other side. And so I like to connect back with you and catch you in Massachusetts and talk about you finding old photographs in the thrift store and making great art out of them. So I really wanted to thank you for coming on to the show and talking about your art and life, and really appreciate you and what you do, Breanna.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, and look forward to so much more. Everybody check out the shop when it comes up. Keep an eye on updates, and take a look through all the incredible art you'll find on Instagram and on her page. Breanna, thank you so much, and I hope we get the chance to talk together soon again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.